Hi everyone, I'm Neil from the Oxford University Press Professional Development team, and we've got Phil Ball here with us for today's interview. So let me just introduce Phil. Phil works as a consultant for the Federation of Basque Schools based in San Sebastian in Spain. He writes material for CLIL, is a teacher trainer, and was closely involved with the award-winning Basque primary education project Elianitz, for which he also wrote the music. He has been involved in several European-based CLIL projects and has written a wide variety of CLIL-based textbooks for the Basque and Spanish social science and English language programs. He co-designed the new CLIL Essentials online course for the British Council and is the module leader on the MA CLIL degree for NILE in England. He also works at the University of the Basque Country, training lecturers to deliver their subjects through English, and his work has included consultancy projects in various countries from Slovakia and the Czech Republic to Japan and Qatar. He's the co-author of the book Putting CLIL into Practice with us, with OUP, and his CLIL textbook series for the Basque curriculum was nominated for the Elton's Innovation Award in London in 2016, and he's currently writing a children's novel for a British publisher. So thanks for being with us today, Phil. Great to have you.
That's okay, Neil. My pleasure. Thanks for the introduction.
Fantastic. Yes, so we brought you here, Phil, to talk about situational competences, because with the LOMLOE, we're seeing a shift towards that. And really, we thought it'd be interesting to speak a little bit about what that means for language teachers. So my first question is, how do you control, I suppose is the word, the level of the language in a situational syllabus? How do you keep it at an appropriate level for your students?
Yeah, it's a crucial question because obviously if you teach language within a situational syllabus, what tends to happen is that, let's say, the units of work that you do tend to be longer. You know, they tend to be longer. They tend to include perhaps more content than in a conventional textbook. That's not better or worse. It's simply what tends to happen. You know, you're given a situation, a context, and you have to not necessarily solve it, but you have to respond to it. You know, at the end of the process. I think that actually, I don't think that language teachers should worry about that too much. I think actually it's an advantage, because what you tend to do is, first of all, you pick situations that might be picked for you, but you can pick situations that are obviously at the maturational or cognitive level of the students. I mean, you would do that anyway. Textbooks do that efficiently, of course. If you take a 13, 14-year-old, you know, what situations are meaningful and authentic to them. Well, once you've decided on that, then obviously, what are they going to do at the end of this unit? What are they going to solve, as it were, or present? I was just thinking about if you, for example, if you took a subject of in science, it could be light science in the English syllabus, and it could be teenage health. And you're discussing the data that you get from the other class. That's authentic. That's a situation. You know, are we healthy? You know, are the other students in the other class as healthy as us? Well, we've got data on them. We use Google Graphs to do that, and so we can have our class in groups analyzing the data of the other class to present it, because the situation says, you know, are they healthy? Well, we can. So I mean, you could isolate the language that's required to do that. And it's quite simple. They're going to have to describe the data, so we need description of data. They're going to have to analyze the data. So again, the language of the analysis of data, which is a bit more scientific, but not super scientific. And perhaps they want to give advice and say, you know, I think we should maybe spend a bit less time on a mobile. We should spend less time on a mobile. So, you know, modality will come in. A description of data, so you can isolate that language. And as I say, if the situation requires the students to be studying longer, they get more time to practice that language, and they probably get more contact with it.
So really, it's kind of the language responding to the content rather than driving the content.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. It's responding to the content, but it's responding in two ways. It's responding to the conceptual content. I know I always insist on this, but it's responding to the conceptual content, and it's responding to the procedural content, because if they have to present the data, then they have to present it in some way. Probably means they've got a PowerPoint, they've got to make that PowerPoint, they've got to decide who talks about what, they've got to decide maybe the format of that presentation to their peers, etc. So it's also procedural content, so that the teacher can work on that, and that's much closer to a normal Cambridge examination format, prosody, stress, intonation, da, da, da. But again, that's a part of the situation. They have to present it efficiently and comprehensibly to their peers. So yeah.
Okay, so my next question is, how does situational competences affect skills, as we used to call them in language programs? So what happens to the 4 skills?
Well, if you take what I just said, you can see clearly enough that the 4 skills are massively involved. You've got reading, writing, speaking, and listening. I don't think, as you would say in Spanish, it's going to be there all the time. The difference is, I think, that and I don't want to be critical of textbooks, but you often get these situations where it's like, okay, Monday, because the textbook determines that Monday we're going to look at speaking, we're going to do speaking, whereas on Tuesday we're going to do some listening. I mean, I think this is okay. I think that teachers try to vary the range of skills that their students use, but it's slightly inauthentic in terms of the content, isn't it? That's the problem. We're speaking today because, well, the textbook says so, or the teacher says so. Whereas in a situational situation, the speaking tends to take place because it has to, because the group is trying to work on something. For example, they're trying to come to consensus about the data of the health they've just seen from the other class. They're trying to come to a consensus about it. And so they have to talk to each other. Well, they might do it in Spanish, but hopefully they'll do some of it in English. And they'll certainly be doing it in English when they come to present. So the teacher will say, hey, I know you're speaking in Spanish, but look, in the end, you're going to have to do it in English. So probably better to do it now, no? So again, I think that the skill set arises more naturally. And I would also say that maybe you could, you said the 4 skills, Neil, that's quite right, but I think you could extend what we call skills, or perhaps meta competencies. You'll get the kids needing to research stuff. How does the data of that class compare with data we can find on the web? I suppose that might be researching also reading strategies. We've got to collaborate. When we collaborate, we have to speak. When we present, when we reach consensus. So all these reaching consensus, collaboration, they can be identified by the teacher and they can be exploited, if you like, into the skills. No?
Okay.
The skills are inescapable in a situational syllabus, and I think are perhaps more authentic, let's say.
So again, it's speaking of that kind of authenticity, it's almost kind of the same, isn't it? It's the skills responding to the situation, rather than us saying, right, today we're doing speaking, today we're doing listening, we're doing in a more authentic way the skill that's required for any particular class or day.
Absolutely, Neil. And also I think what happens is that in a situational syllabus, when a teacher gets used to it, they might think, okay, last time we had that situation, we mainly did speaking. In this situation, I'm going to create this situation, I'm going to manipulate the situation. So writing becomes the main skill. They'll still be speaking, they'll still be listening, and they'll still be reading, but we're going to turn up the volume of the writing. Maybe that perhaps the presentation would be a written thing. We're going to write to the municipal authorities. We've got a different audience, and so so you can manipulate that. I think the more you get experience that using situations.
Sure. So what does all this mean for assessment? How do you assess language in a situational framework like that?
Yeah, always the difficult question, no? Well, I think the first question is that in assessment is what does the student need to prove his or her, let's say, competence. Let's use the word competence. It's not necessarily a competence framework, but the LOMLOE does talk about competencies as well. It talks about competencies within the situation. So I think using the word competence is fine. What does the student need, again, in order to prove his or her competence in this situation? Even if it's group work, you can still assess the individual contribution to the group. You can assess the group performance also as a whole. You can write rubrics for that. I think it's actually I think it's actually easier to do it than in a normal conventional syllabus, because the demands of the situation are so clear. You have got to do this in 3 weeks' time. You've got to do this and this and this. How are you going to do it? I think also in terms of formative assessment or continuous assessment, it's also much easier, because if you've got the kids working together for a lot of the time and you're facilitating that group work, which is again working towards this goal, if you're facilitating the group work, you can see if the groups are progressing or not. They've got a certain thing to do by the end of this lesson. Why isn't, if it's not working, why isn't it working? Well, it's because Fulanito Tal isn't cooperating, Neil hasn't done his job, so it's perfectly clear. So in a sense, the product depends on the process, but both can be assessed, and both can be assessed along the path, if you like. It's not just about the product. Again, so you can easily make rubrics for these, what we call these metadisciplinary competencies. If the students have got to work together to get this data presented, then you can assess that collaboration. You can be very brutal about it and say, when we see your presentation, we will know if you work together efficiently. That's a bit brutal, but you can certainly assess these things along the way. So it's nice. I think that teachers are finally given something concrete to assess continuously. It's both formative and summative, if you like. It's great.
Sure. So we kind of looked at things from the teacher's perspective, just changing the perspective a little bit. In terms of the kids, I mean, what are the differences for them in a situational competence or situation-based syllabus? Sorry.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's I would call it visibility, Neil. I talked about this last week in a conference. I said that the main problem for secondary kids, possibly more than primary kids, the main problem for secondary kids, particularly when you extend the length of a unit, for example, the main problem is, why are we doing this? And what are we supposed to be doing? It's a procedural problem. I think that I said last week in this conference that I think that students are quite existential. I don't mean in a philosophical way. What I mean is that if the student has got geography at 11 o'clock after break, they've got geography at 11 o'clock after break, and they just happen to be doing volcanoes, and they might remember from last Friday that they're doing volcanoes or not. So the teacher will say, remember last Friday we're doing volcanoes and we're looking at this and that and the other. No, you have to remind them at secondary, at Bachelor, probably even at university, sadly. So what I mean is this tendency of students to be in the moment existentially, I think is broken up by situations, because they're constantly working towards something. All the teacher has to say is, okay, remember, today we've got to make sure that we've looked at that data carefully, and we're going to work on the advice for those students. Okay, let's get to work. Let's go. Boom, boom, boom. I think it helps the students to see where they're supposed to be. It's more visible, let's say, than I think a normal conventional curriculum syllabus. That's just the way I've seen it in action. It's not perfect, but I think it's better in that sense.
Okay, well, I mean, Phil, thank you very much. That's all been fascinating. So it's all, I think, as you say, better is the way we're going. So I think that sounds fantastic. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today.
No problem. My pleasure, Neil.
Great. Well, let's see if we see you again in another interview soon. Okay, so thanks very much.
Okay, bye-bye. Ciao.